Corporatism simply means the merger between state and corporate power, meaning that the government and corporations have come together in a partnership and worked to their own self-interests against the people. In order to understand what basically causes corporatism, we must first understand what corporatism's goal is. Corporatism's goal is to destroy competition, that way to work in their own self-interest, to open up monopolies, basically destroying competition and consumer choice to work in their favour. When you enable the state the power and control over the economy, you open yourself up to the corruption of corporatism, because this is where you enable the lobbyists the opportunity to step in, pay off the politicians to get the government to lay on more regulations to stamp out competition so that they can create these monopolies. So the way in which we prevent is to basically limit government as much as possible. So corporatism is basically caused through the means of government intervention, basically through socialism. No, capitalism is the opposite of corporatism. Capitalism is an individualist ideology, whereas corporatism is a collectivist ideology. Basically, capitalism would limit the government of its power. Capitalism is the separation of the economy from government, so basically the economy is decentralised. Corporatism is all about centralisation, in other words it stems from the central power of government. So when you limit the government of its power, then there's no longer that opportunity for the lobbyists to lobby the powerless government. Another thing that you must take into consideration is the very fact that in a free market you have a very fiercely competitive economy, and due to the fierce competition, this is what prevents monopolies from forming. Just as, of course, consumer choice will not allow monopolies to form unless, of course, the consumers allow that to happen. So in a free market you have a very fiercely competitive economy with consumer choice. It's basically corporatism through regulation of government that basically limits the two most important things that prevent the monopolies from forming. In other words, it's government regulation that limits consumers' options, it's government regulation that destroys the competition, and in doing so, that's what opens the monopolies. So capitalism is not corporatism, and it's not the early stages of corporatism. It's basically the opposite of corporatism. It goes against what everything corporatism stands for. In other words, when you deregulate the economy, you're opening up consumer choice, and of course you're opening up competition. Both of these things are what destroy monopolies, and we've got the historical evidence to prove that, of course, there's never been a monopoly under a free market system. It's always been because of government's interference of the economy. So capitalising on all the gains and socialising all the losses, or privatising the gains, socialising all the losses, or you may want to call that capitalism for the poor and socialism for the rich. A lot of people misinterpret what this means. A lot of people think it means, capitalism is making people poor and socialism is somehow making the people rich, and it's only socialism for them, therefore socialism must be special, that it's making them rich. That's not what it means. What socialism for the rich simply means is that they get to live for free off of all of their losses that they make. In other words, what the big corporations have done is lobbied the government so that any losses that they make, they get to live for free off of it, because it's you, the taxpayer, who is forced to pay for it. Now, a defining ethic of socialism is government coercion, and the government coercively forces taxation out of your hands collectively. That key word, collectively, it's nothing at all to do with individualism. People of society are forced into this collectivist system where they're forced to pay that taxation to the government. It gets redistributed across to pay for the losses of the corporations. So that's simply what it means by socialising the losses. It means socialism for the rich because they're getting to live for free off of it. Whereas, of course, the gains that they make, the privatising the gains, or you call that capitalising the gains, they basically make the gains, they get to keep all the money that they make, but of course they're forcing you to pay for their losses, and it's all done through the centralisation of the economy. In other words, it's done through socialism, because the government's there for them to get them to protect their losses, to get them to force taxation on society collectively. It's done through a socialist system to basically steal money from you in order to pay for the big corporations, and that is essentially what, you know, capitalising the gains and socialising the losses means. It doesn't mean, of course, capitalism's making people poor, because that just isn't the case. So I hope that, you know, gives you an understanding of something that can often be misinterpreted and can be very confusing to some people. And if you do have questions, feel free to ask me about that. So one of the biggest misinterpretations that we have today is that all big business is evil and all big business is bad for us. It's not so much the big businesses that are the problem, it's actually the government itself, it's the corporatist system that's the problem. If we turn ourselves back in history to Standard Oil, a lot of people have claimed this myth countless times that Standard Oil gained this monopoly through the means of predatory pricing in the 1870s, and somehow they ran away with all the wealth and power for themselves and they jacked up the prices, etc. Standard Oil, if we go back to 1869, it cost 30 cents per barrel of oil, and a year later in 1870 Standard Oil had gained 4% share of the market. 9 years later Standard Oil gained 90% share of the market. Now this is where people, you know, believe that okay, they gained 90% share of the market, they must have done that through predatory pricing. It wasn't the case. It was because John D. Rockefeller was more efficient in his oil refinery business than the others were. He found ways to cut costs, and he saved the railroad industry about $10,000. That'll give you an idea of how more efficient he was with his industry than these other failing industries, and he basically took over those other industries and they benefited as a whole under his company. But what's most important is the keynote here. From 1879, when he gained 90% share of the market, to 1897, basically years onwards, the price of a barrel of oil kept on dropping. The whole idea behind predatory pricing would be that, you know, Standard Oil would have slightly lowered their prices below their competition, and then once the competition's wiped out, he would have jacked up his prices and shafted the consumers. Well, that didn't happen. He gained that because he was more efficient with his industry. And of course, when he gained 90% share of the market, the prices kept on dropping because that, you know, competition forced his company to continue on dropping the costs. So by 1897, it only cost 5.9 cents per barrel of oil. In other words, to go from 30 cents a barrel of oil to 5.9 cents per barrel of oil, the whole of society became richer as a result of that. And that's a prime example that big businesses can be very beneficial to the society as a whole. It's not big business that's the problem, it's actually the current economic system as a result of government intervention. So the way in which we prevent corporatism from forming is by reducing the size of government and taking the economy out of the hands of government. Basically preventing, you know, the government having any power for these lobbyists to lobby the government for more regulations, etc. So the most key important point is the very fact that you need to reduce the size of government and separate the economy from government. That's how you prevent corporatism. And of course, the other important point is the very fact that it's two key important things that stop monopolies from forming. One is consumer choice, and the other is what we call competition. So in a free market you have fierce competition, you have strong consumer choice, there's a vast array of options due to the fierce competition, and that's what prevents the monopolies from forming. Many people falsely believe that by regulating the economy more, somehow this is what prevents the monopolies from forming, which is incorrect, because through regulation the government is actually limiting consumers' choice and of course destroying competition. Through the means of government regulation, for example, you have quantity controls, price controls, you have many other controls such as quality controls. You're giving the government the power to regulate what is quality rather than leaving it down to the consumer. So essentially what government's regulation does is it limits consumers' options, and it basically limits competition. It weighs down the smaller businesses, it gives power to the big corporations, and that's why the big corporations lobby the government for more regulations to beat out the competition. So by deregulating the economy, by leaving the market to self-regulate, by opening up the fierce competition and consumer choice, that is what will prevent corporatism from forming, from having an economy with low levels of government regulation and having a market economy that strongly self-regulates. This is how we prevent corporatism from forming. Anyway people, I hope you've enjoyed the video and everything, and I hope it's been educational for yourself. Like I say, if you've got any questions at all, feel free to ask me in the comment section below and I'll be sure to get back to you, and I shall talk to you later, right? Cheers. Alright people, you can also check out my other two videos. Of course, one I had done on the National Socialism, the Undeniable Truth, and of course I had done one on what is National Socialism. That might actually give you more of an understanding, the connection with the corporatism. Also feel free to like the video, share the video, favourite, subscribe, and you can also check out my Twitter of course, which is Alban Gubra. It's ALBANNGUBRATH. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed the video and I shall talk to you later. Right, thank you. Cheers.